Have you ever stopped to wonder where the stories of a lush paradise, forbidden plants, and the actual creation of humanity really come from? I mean, we often think we know the origins of our most famous creation myths, right? But to truly find their roots, we actually need to travel back thousands of years. We're going to ancient Sumer, the literal cradle of civilization, to uncover a story that predates the texts we're all familiar with today.
Welcome to This Explainer. I'm absolutely thrilled to be your guide today as we demystify one of the most important, foundational, and, let's be honest, complex deities of the ancient world. We're talking about Ninhursag, the great mother goddess of the Sumerian pantheon. We're going to break down her history, her mythology, and her incredible legacy so we can make this massive ancient topic clear, accessible, and totally unforgettable.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll meet the mother goddess. Then, we'll untangle her many names and many faces. After that, we'll look at stags, mountains, and omegas before diving into the Dilmun creation myth and finally, the story of fashioning the first humans.
Part 1. Meet the mother goddess, the lady of the sacred mountain.
So, to really understand ancient Mesopotamia, you've got to realize that Ninhursag wasn't just some minor background character. She was actually one of the 7 great deities, acting as this overarching foundational mother figure to both gods and mortals. And if we break down the literal translation of her name, it actually reveals a ton about how the Sumerians viewed her. Ninhursag comes from the Sumerian Nin, meaning lady, and Harsag, meaning sacred mountain or foothill. But, and this is absolutely key, she wasn't just a lady who hung out on a mountain. In a lot of texts, she was viewed as the literal personification of the earth and the mountains themselves. Basically, she was the very ground the ancient Sumerians walked on.
Now, the really crucial point here is that her roles weren't static. They evolved beautifully over the centuries. You see, ancient syncretism, which is essentially the blending of different beliefs, was totally a feature of this culture, not a bug. Early on, she was this nurturing presence for small towns, almost like a birth goddess for local animals. But later, she leveled up to become the literal midwife to the ancient kings of Lagash, placing golden crowns right on their heads. By the time we hit the 3rd early dynastic period, she had been elevated to the supreme mother of the world. Section 2. Many names, many faces. Taming the chaos of Sumerian syncretism. Look, if you've ever read Mesopotamian texts, you know the names can get super overwhelming. And that's okay, because over time, she basically absorbed the powers and titles of a bunch of other regional goddesses. But what's really interesting here is how cleanly her various titles map out, proving she was the ultimate figure of birth and power. Whether she was worshipped as Ninmah, the Great Queen, or Nintu, the Lady of Birth, or even Belet-Ili in the Akkadian tradition, all of these names point directly back to her overarching authority as a foundational creator. This complex family tree gives us an even better understanding of her place in the cosmos. Just keep in mind her family dynamic shifted a bit depending on the city and the era we're looking at. Her main siblings were absolute powerhouses like Enlil and Enki. Her most well-attested consort was Shulpaye, though depending on the myth, she was also linked to Enlil and Enki. And her kids? There were a lot of them, and they were powerful, shifting just like her titles did across the ancient landscape. Moving on to Section 3, Stags, Mountains, and Omegas. Visualizing the ancient goddess. So how do the ancient Sumerians actually picture this incredibly powerful deity in their minds? Well, the physical evidence is sort of split into 2 fascinating camps. On one hand, we've got this heavy geological imagery. Picture a goddess seated on scale-like mountains, wearing a tiered skirt and sporting a horned headdress that literally has a mountain right on top of it. But on the other hand, we see this deep, intimate connection to the wild earth. For instance, in the Mari temple frieze, she's beautifully represented by wildlife symbolism. You'll often see her flanked by male and female deer, or stags, just peacefully eating plants.
But perhaps her most mysterious symbol is the omega shape. This shows up in art as far back as 3000 BC, looking exactly like the Greek letter omega, and it often marked these really important boundary stones. Now, academics actively debate what this actually means. Since she's a mother goddess, a lot of experts believe it represents a stylized womb. However, other scholars argue, actually, scratch that, it might just be a schematic drawing of a woman's hair. Either way you look at it, it was a super potent symbol of her presence.
Section 4. The Dilmun creation myth. Enki and Ninhursag.
All right, gather round, because this is one of her most famous surviving myths, set in the incredibly prosperous, water-rich wetland of Dilmun. And honestly, the story is a wild step-by-step family drama. It kicks off with Enki and Ninhursag having a daughter, which then sparks generations of rapid, incestuous births right along the riverbank. Eventually, Ninhursag takes Enki's semen and actually plants it directly into the earth.
And from this, 8 magical plants spring up from the dirt. But Enki, who is ever the boundary pusher, discovers these plants and completely ignores the rules. He just goes ahead and eats the forbidden flora.
Well, as you can imagine, Ninhursag is absolutely furious. But in retaliation, she doesn't throw a lightning bolt or anything like that. She does something far more profound. She simply casts her life-giving eye away from Enki. Just by withdrawing her gaze, the great god Enki falls gravely ill. I mean, this perfectly highlights the sheer power she wielded. Even the greatest gods could be brought down simply by the withdrawal of her maternal attention.
The resolution of this myth is just as fascinating. A humble fox actually steps up and strikes a deal with the gods to track down the angry Ninhursag. And it works. She eventually relents and comes back to the ailing Enki. She sits by him and she literally draws the pain directly out of 8 specific parts of his body. And this brilliantly illustrates her ultimate power. Because from those 8 healed body parts, 8 entirely new minor deities are born. She literally takes pain and illness and turns it into brand new life.
Now, if you're sitting there thinking, wait a minute, this sounds a little bit familiar, you definitely aren't alone. Scholars constantly compare the myth of Dilmun directly to the book of Genesis. Think about it. In Dilmun, you've got a lush paradise, the consumption of forbidden plants, a severe curse, and life ultimately created from a healed body part. Over in Genesis, you have the Garden of Eden, eating the forbidden fruit, the fall of man, and Eve being created from Adam's rib. Seeing these shared mythological roots lined up side by side like this, it's just absolutely incredible.
Section 5. Fashioning the First Humans. Enki and Ninmah.
In this narrative, we see her operating under the name Ninmah, actively shaping the destiny and the physical forms of humankind alongside Enki. And it all starts with this massive divine collaboration. The goddess Nama basically puts in a request for the creation of mankind. So Enki comes up with this idea to form human bodies out of clay. But he can't do it alone. Ninmah, along with 7 assistant birth goddesses known as the Shasuratu, step in to physically help shape the humans. And once all that hard work of creation is finally done, the gods throw a grand banquet to celebrate. And in a very relatable ancient detail, they drink a whole lot of beer.
But, as you might guess, all that beer leads to some trouble. A drunken competition breaks out between Enki and Ninmah over who is the better creator. Ninmah shapes 7 humans with various illnesses and disabilities, basically challenging Enki to find a place for them in the world. And Enki actually succeeds, finding societal roles for every single one. Then, Enki turns the tables. He creates a human so deeply damaged that Ninmah just cannot figure out what to do with them. She loses the competition and bitterly complains about being driven from her home. It's a wild story, but it's actually a profound ancient attempt to explain human ailments, disabilities, and our incredibly varied roles in society.
Finally, the legacy of the Mother Goddess, a power feared and revered. So from a nurturing local figure to the supreme mother of the world, Ninhursag shaped the destiny of kings, gods, and humanity itself. She was the mountain, she was the earth, and she was the ultimate giver of life. But make no mistake here, she was deeply feared just as much as she was loved. Just look at this fierce ancient door socket curse from an early king. It says, "Whoever removes this tablet, may Ninhursaga and Samas uproot his seed and destroy his progeny." Wow, that really reminds us of the absolute gravity, respect, and honestly, the terrifying power this foundational mother commanded over ancient rulers.
Which leaves us with a massive question to ponder. As we clearly see traces of her stories, from lush gardens to forbidden plants, echoing in the myths we still tell today, what other ancient Sumerian ghosts are hiding in plain sight in our modern beliefs? Keep questioning the origins of the stories you take for granted, and keep learning. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you next time.